We're at the Ringside Cafe in downtown Columbus. It's a place where hand carvings of ram heads and flowers sit comfortably under imported stained glass windows. And legendary burgers are named after famous boxers like Ali, Smokin' Joe, and Oscar De La Hoya. There's also house-cut fries with sea salt and beer-battered onion rings. Opened in 1897 and close to the State House, the Ringside Cafe has seen its share of good guys and bad. Historians Ed Lentz and Doreen Uhas-Sauer are here to talk about some of the notable villains of Columbus. Well, I gotta tell you, learning about Columbus history as we do this show has been amazing to me, but now we get to talk about the villains of Columbus. Tell me about some of the infamous people that Columbus is known for, or maybe not even known for, that we should be known for.
Well, should we define what a villain is first?
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
Make sure we've got the same playing
So we're
field.
all on the same page, right?
Right. What would you say, Ed?
Well, I think basically it's not just a person who's a criminal, not just a person who's infamous. I think it has something to do with basically somebody who is doing things that we find either ethically or morally reprehensible, and that may be illegal as well.
It's somebody who's now crossed a line of morality, but it has been more of a conscious choice, and it will have repercussions.
And you need to remember there is something about the power of place in all of this as well. As the town begins to grow, it will develop a vice district, which in Columbus, more often than not, is called the Badlands. It was a mixed community, a wide variety of ethnic, racial, national groups. Probably the lord and master of most of this is a man named Alexander Smoky Hobbs. He shows up in 1895 in Columbus as a boxer, among other things, and ends up involved with gambling, involved with a wide variety of sale of illicit drugs of one kind or another, and he's arrested over and over and over again. He'll end up spending 7 years in the Ohio Penitentiary for shooting a fray, as they say in the trade. But when he comes out, he promptly gets back into the same business again. But he's the kind of person that if a newspaper can't figure out who's trying to do something evil in town, they'll blame it on Smoky Hobbs.
When in doubt, blame it on Smokey.
When in doubt, blame it on Smoky.
Well, he was certainly a headline grabber. So you knew you were going to pick up the paper because he would say the most outrageous things, just it would appear in print. Things that today you go, oh, I can't believe I just read that. But he's part of the group that would have been marginalized. Smokey himself was listed on the census as mulatto. Smokey is married at least 3 times. So among his other things, he's got to be a ladies' man. His first marriage is, I love this, is married to a woman in a church by the Reverend James Poindexter. She lasts about a year with him, and he always seems to be able to pick up another woman. He's running the opium dens, he's running brothels. His best clientele was the fact that the Columbus Barracks, Fort Hays, were there. In fact, he winds up in federal prison in Atlanta because he has now violated what is essentially a federal law that brothels were to be so many miles away from an Army base. 5 miles?
Mm-hmm.
And he violates that. So now it's a federal crime.
Right.
He seems to get a little bit of a second wind in Prohibition by the very nature of it, because he can amass much more than everything else. In a funny way, what his downfall was, he was the ruler of the 7th Ward. So he was the go-to guy when the Republicans were always in office at that particular period of time, wanted to turn out the votes and get something done. He was the ward healer. And he could make deals, and he could get people to vote. He could pretty much talk himself into anything. And then there was the payoff. They wouldn't touch his vice. But by 1912, when good government changes and the wards are done away with, he's lost his power base. So there is a bit of a decline there, and then you kind of start to watch it go down.
I think age and health problems catch up with him by the 1920s. And he really is not heard from all that much from about the 1920s on. He won't die until April of 1934.
Well, it sounds like Smoky Hobbs knew how to take advantage of an opportunity and the people around it. Anybody else in Columbus that was famous for taking advantage?
Oh, I think the opportunists really helped to define what a villain is. One of them is one of the more respected businessmen of Columbus in the 19th and early 20th century, and that's Samuel Hartman, who is the inventor of Peruna, the patent medicine. And he was a bona fide doctor. He had graduated from medical school in Philadelphia in 1857. He was not originally from Columbus, but when he arrives here, he is, and like a lot of other doctors at the time, experimenting in his own compounds. And these compounds were there to generally cure everything. And for him, the specialty was catarrh, which was, how would you best describe that?
Congestion. When you think of catarrh, you'd think about maybe having congestion of the lungs. But according to Hartman, you could have catarrh in any part of your body.
Right.
You could have catarrh of the hand, or catarrh of the ear, or catarrh of the nose, or catarrh of the knee. And whatever your catarrh was, Paruna, which was the name of an Indian chief who came to Hartman in a dream and revealed the medicinal formula
Good for
that
him.
good for man or beast, internal or external, right? And he was guaranteed that if you drink 2 pint bottles of Paruna, it would take care of any catarrh that you had. Given the fact that it was predominantly alcohol, it's pretty easy to see why after 2 bottles of Paruna you don't care what catarrh you have.
Right.
But he made a fortune doing this. This is the placebo effect unchained. Okay? That if you believe that colored water will cure you, maybe it will.
And he makes no bones about it. He comes right out in a Collier's magazine article who's investigating him and says, you know, if you believe you're going to get well, you're going to get well, you know? So of course, you know, it's curing people. But for me, it's not just that how many people he tricked, people who would have really had diseases that would have gone unnoticed, people who probably died because of this particular diagnosis that he had for them. Part of the advertising was based on what would be his vice president and his son-in-law, Frederick Schumacher, who is known as the father of the testimonial. I'm not even sure Schumacher would have completely been in agreement with exactly how Hartman did this, but it was when he zeroed in on 50 of the top military people out of the Civil War, the admirals and the generals and others, and he got them to endorse this, most of whom had never, of course, had anything to do with it. And he had a sign-off paper, and he gave them an nominal amount of money for doing this. But when an admiral objected to having his name in the paper in this huge ad that was being seen by everyone, and he said, I never used that stuff. You need to retract that. And Hartman said, hey, you know, I'm happy to retract that, but I'll have to reveal that you signed this piece of paper that said you tried it and you lied. And your reputation will be the one that goes down.
Wow.
And it's that blackmail. And I think the blackmail, in my mind, in addition to all of the other bogus things that led up to it, really puts him in the villain category for me.
Wow, that's incredible.
My second favorite villain is the one that is probably most, I think, disputed by other people. And I'm assuming you know something about the famous Dr. Snook.
Yes, I've heard of him, yes.
I think he enjoys a rapid popularity every now and then. Every generation discovers him. And that is the veterinary professor at Ohio State who lives on West 10th Avenue with his wife and his little girl and is a member of King Avenue Church, and he's upstanding, and he invents the Snook hook, which looks like a big knitting needle almond way to perform vasectomies on small animals. And he's seen as a very bookish man, and he is lured into sort of the love nest of Theora Hicks. He passes himself off as kind of like a traveling salesman. She's the younger wife. He's in his 40s, she's in her 20s, and she had been a graduate student who had done some work for him, and he murders her over by the quarries, and the body is discovered, and the trail gets back to the love nest pretty quickly.
The doctor basically used a ball-peen hammer, and then when that wasn't sufficient to the end, he ended up using a knife to finish the job.
Wow.
And he had left a wide variety of evidence, as Doreen says, back at that apartment, so it wasn't very hard for local law enforcement to figure out what exactly was happening. And it was one of the more spectacular trials in Columbus history that was followed very closely, day by day, with large amounts of the court transcript reprinted in the newspaper. So the case basically sort of grabbed not only local but national attention at the time, and the doctor was convicted and sent to the Ohio Penitentiary, where he was ultimately executed for the murder of Theora Hicks.
But what was interesting was started coming out about her and how the papers portrayed her. She's the only child of this very sainted-looking couple who truly were bewildered by everything. So she becomes the victim. She is the young girl lured in by the older man. They also can't explain some little things that start to come out in testimony, like she worked fairly menial jobs around the university to help support herself, and her parents did send her money. But suddenly she has well over $1,000 in a bank account, and it's not really known how she gets this. Her roommates are suspicious of her activity. A former boyfriend, for the most part, is also part of this in the sense that she had tried a lot of other things with him. So she's the one who is suggesting that they try various drugs for a sexual enhancement. Now the story reverses. And because he is the murderer, one would assume he is the villain. Of course, he took this young girl's life. On the other hand, there is nothing about her that suggests that she was naive, innocent, or anything but perhaps very calculating. In other words, this was something she had done up until now in other situations to get what she wanted.
I've learned so much. And I've also learned to stay on the straight and narrow.
Then our job is well done.
Right. I thank you so much for sharing these amazing stories.